Hey everyone, Ethan Ainsworth here. This is not going to be a tremendously edited video. I don't really have any thesis here. This is just sort of a standard comic book review. I want to talk about Daredevil number 11. I'm not really sure what week this came out, but it's been out for at least a week or two. And anyway, basically, during the school year, that is from the months of September to April, I'm forced to get my comics shipped in, and I can only afford to get them shipped in once a month. So basically, I don't get my books until till the first week of the next month. This time they were a little late though. But anyway, yeah. So Daredevil number 11. This is really good. This is part one of Through Hell. I won't spoil the whole book or anything like that, but there's some really solid material in this book. I think this is one of, if not the best series Marvel is currently publishing. At least I like it to a really high degree. This series is full of emotion, character. It's an excellent character study, particularly for Matt Murdock. But we get some great Spider-Man moments in this particular issue as well. You really deep dive into the psychology of Matt Murdock with a lot of these books. So obviously Jed MacKay wrote Man Without Fear. You know how I feel about Jed MacKay if you've watched my Black Cat reviews. I like the guy a lot. I think he's a great writer. But yeah, that was a really interesting series and a good character study for Matt Murdock. And that transitions right into this series here. And it's quite good. It passes the torch really well. Zadarsky takes the premise and he rolls with it. And for reasons I won't get into too deeply, but Matt Murdock is not Daredevil at this time, and he hasn't been for several issues. And it's kind of more interesting than most of what you would get in an actual straight up superhero story where he is actively going out as Daredevil. It's really solid stuff. But yeah, basically Matt Murdock not being himself when he came back from his injuries, being overzealous, being overconfident, being a little reckless, because he's not he when he was put in the hospital, he never sort of fully recovered right away. He sort of went back out as Daredevil before he was ready, and it resulted in the accidental death of like a criminal. And so he's just not been Matt Murdock. He's not been Daredevil for several issues at this point, but it's really good. Like the stuff with just Matt Murdock being Matt Murdock rather than Daredevil is actually fairly more interesting than most of the stuff where he is actually Daredevil. But anyway, we start the issue with this girl, and we see that her boyfriend, we presume he's her boyfriend, is obviously violent. He's erratic. He's a druggie. He's behaving in a violent and irrational manner, and he's obviously incredibly jealous. And so she locks herself in the bathroom and she calls the cops. But before the police can arrive, we see a figure that looks like Daredevil creeping in from the window. So Daredevil shows up and he fights this guy. We can see that he's not quite wearing his normal outfit, and they rumble for a bit, and it's revealed that it's not Daredevil. It's just some guy dressed up as Daredevil. And basically, in lieu of Daredevil, average citizens of Hell's Kitchen who have been sort of influenced and affected by the work that Daredevil has done for the community have sort of taken it upon themselves to act as their own sort of their own heroes, their own vigilantes, sort of try to help out the neighborhood. But yeah, Chip Zdarsky, when I first read him at Marvel, I was not a fan. At the beginning of his run on Spectacular Spider-Man, I wasn't a fan of what he was doing with the character, and I didn't think he understood the character, because he really didn't demonstrate a good understanding at all of the character, and he wasn't, I just didn't enjoy those stories. They were boring, and they were a little insulting. They were dreadfully unfunny. But I guess he was abducted by aliens and replaced by like a Skrull or something, because this last year or more, maybe 2 years at this point, Chip Zdarsky has been killing it, man. He's been really going ham. Spider-Man Life Story which just concluded. I might do a video reviewing the entirety of that mini. That's one of my favorite Spider-Man stories of the last 10 years, easily. It's probably not, I don't know if it's my favorite Spider-Man story of the last 10 years, but it's certainly up there as far as comics goes. Um, it's really good, and it does sort of understand the character, and it's a very interesting character study of not only Peter Parker but his supporting cast and the world he lives in. Um, but yeah, this is sort of like a very similar thing. In the previous issue, Matt Murdock and either the issue before this or the one before that, Matt Murdock and Reed Richards were just sort of sitting in the park, hanging out, and they were discussing like philosophy. Basically, Matt Murdock asks Reed Richards if there's a god. He's basically like, "Listen, Reed, you're the smartest person on the planet. I've got to ask you, is there a god?" And I won't spoil it, but the conversation that ensues between the two men is really, really good and really interesting. It's it's something I really like in superhero comics. It's just the discussion of philosophy, and so far in this book, Zadarsky has been doing a lot of that, and he's been doing it very well. Um, so yeah, Matt Murdock's sort of been occasionally performing acts as like a pseudo Daredevil type character, and this is like crazy to me. Like, this book got me to care about a group of mobsters, like a family of mobsters who are just like, by most standard definitions, are just like bad people. They're not good people. But this book somehow got me invested. Or this series got me invested in these characters. They got me to care who these people were. They got me to care about their relationships and their struggles. And you want to see them like sort of make it out of it okay. Which is like it's not something you see in comic books typically, with like characters like mobs. Obviously Magneto and Doctor Doom are very complex characters, and they are sort of sympathetic in their own way, but never have mobsters, as far as I'm aware, been portrayed in such a light in a Marvel comic book, and it's really interesting. And we get Stan's soapbox. I'm just gonna skip a couple pages here, but basically, this detective who's been trying to chase down Daredevil, he's been trying to stop Daredevil. He sets up a fake mugging, basically, to try to lure out Daredevil, but he ends up getting Spider-Man, who like immediately figures out what's going on, diffuses the situation, and basically like takes him to a rooftop. And they have a really good discussion later on in the issue. And we get a little bit of interlude with the Kingpin. Nothing, really to write home about, but it's sort of there's a really interesting Kingpin subplot going on right now, and it's sort of going through the Amazing Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man to some capacity, and that is to say Miles Morales' Spider-Man series, and Daredevil, where he's sort of like kind of going legit, and it's sort of interesting. But yeah, we get this really cool discussion here between Spider-Man and Detective Cole here, and basically Spider-Man is telling him that, like, yeah, Daredevil screwed up and he shouldn't be acting as Daredevil until he's ready, until he knows he's able to do what he did before he knows until he knows he's able to perform as a hero should be, able to diffuse the situation without letting people get hurt. And Spider-Man says, like, he might never be in that position again, but I'm sure as hell not going to let him rot away in prison because he's a goddamn hero. It's really good. And, he sort of sits on this rooftop with him for an hour, which is how long it takes for his web fluid to dissolve. And he basically gives him this decision. Is he like, are you going to uphold the law, or are you going to uphold righteousness, basically, is the situation. They sort of have a discussion. They have a debate, as it were, about morality versus legality. That is to say, the law is the law, but the law is not necessarily always right. And they sort of have a discussion about whether it's better to uphold what you believe to be right, what you believe to be righteous, or to follow the law absolutely. And so that's sort of the dynamic here. It's kind of similar to the sort of Punisher um, Daredevil dynamic, but it's obviously, it's obviously different in that both of these people are traditionally defined as upstanding citizens. But yeah, it's really, I'm not going to basically, I'm trying to dance around the conversation a little bit, the sort of themes of this issue a little bit, so that you can read it yourself and enjoy it because it's a really excellent book. But yeah, um, so Daredevil is there's a lot of stuff between Foggy and Daredevil and Foggy and Elektra in this book as well, but I won't go over that because I want you to read it. This by the way, this obviously has my highest recommendation. This whole series, and its predecessor, Man Without Fear, excellent material. I actually got my Man Without Fear signed by Jed MacKay. He's a great guy. He actually interviewed him on my podcast, Knights of Marvel podcast. So if you're interested, you should go check out that podcast. Jed MacKay was gracious enough to come on and talk to me a little bit about Man Without Fear, a little bit about Black Cat, and what he's sort of working on right now. But yeah, Daredevil. So one of this Daredevil we saw at the beginning of the issue, this pseudo Daredevil, he sort of gets kidnapped by these. We're not really sure if they're corrupt cops. We're not really sure what their deal is, but we see that he's been sort of kidnapped by them and restrained, and so that's where the issue leaves off. I gotta say the covers in these issues are really great as well. But yeah, Chip Zdarsky's Daredevil Man Without Fear. The art is excellent. The storytelling is unparalleled. It's really, really solid work, and books like this don't sell enough copies. You know what I mean? It's always like the event books, usually, not always, but it's oftentimes the event books that get the highest sales. Obviously, books like Amazing Spider-Man are consistently like pretty good benchmark books because they're always like top 5 or so selling for copies a month. Really solid stuff though. Anyway, oh yeah, check out Nerdicane as well. He's a great guy. He's a great reviewer. He's sort of a similar channel to me in the sort of themes he discusses and the sort of stuff he does. That is, he sort of talks about the state of the comic book industry, SJW, Marvel, etc., pop culture, and he does comic reviews similar to this. So, if you like this video, you should definitely go check out Nerdicane as well. His link will be in the description. Yeah, thanks for tuning in.